At issue tonight, Mark Carney's first week as Prime Minister, including a trip to Europe to shore up support for Canada.
I want to ensure that France and the whole of Europe works enthusiastically with Canada.
And a strategic trip to Canada's north.
We must invest in Canada's north.
So what's been made of Carney's first week in office, and do his trips give us any insight into his priorities? I'm Rosemary Barton here to break it down. Tonight, Chantal Hebert, Althia Raj, and Aaron Wary is in for Andrew Coyne tonight. Good to see all of you. Chantal, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of that first trip by the Prime Minister, choosing to meet with key European leaders before meeting with the President and then heading up north as well?
I think it was a smart move. For one, it kept Mark Carney on top of the news every day. Two, he touched all bases. You do well in Quebec when you go to France first. You do well in many parts of Canada when you go to the UK. And you do well overall when you go to Iqaluit and touch on Indigenous people. So basically, the symbolism behind it was interesting, but also the politics as in policy to say, Donald Trump, I'm not sure Donald Trump has said Mark Carney's name yet. But Donald Trump is threatening us. There are other things we can be doing. And by the way, I know there's a lot of significance to going to the Arctic. Can I just remember, because I'm the eldest person on this panel, that political leaders tend to go north before an election campaign, because they can't use the time to go north during the election campaign, which is how I got to Iqaluit with Brian Mulroney and Jean Chrétien.
Yeah, and it's also much easier to go to Iqaluit when you have your a plane, the government plane, rather than your, I guess you have rented planes, but yes, now all three of them have been to Nunavut before the election campaign, so wouldn't expect them to go back. You're quite right. Althia, what did you make of some of the signals that the Prime Minister was sending this week?
He was trying to send a message that this is a man of action. This is a man that's not going to wait on the sidelines. I don't think there was a lot of deliverables that came out of the European trip, but I agree with all the points Chantal made. The symbolism was important. Add to that, he had a meeting with Legault. He had a meeting with Ford. He had a meeting with Danielle Smith today. He walked in the St. Patrick's Parade in Montreal. He made announcements that brought the comparison against Pierre Poilievre. The announcement in Iqaluit was a reminder that when Pierre Poilievre went to Iqaluit, he announced a military base there without talking to anybody there about building a military base there. He stole the thunder out of the carbon tax campaign that Pierre Poilievre has been on for about 2.5 years by making his first move a cabinet decision that they were going to bring the price down to zero and eventually get rid of it. Again, this morning, Thursday morning, in Edmonton, he makes an announcement that's incredibly similar to Pierre Poilievre's housing announcement, but also adds on top of that he's going to boost the Home Accelerator Fund, which is something that Conservative MPs have asked the government for more money for their communities for. So it's been very smart tactically that he gets to use this week so Canadians get used to seeing him as Prime Minister in the hopes, the Liberals hope, that Canadians will like what they see and give him the job on a more permanent basis. Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of been an advantage for him, frankly.
It's been a huge advantage, and it will continue to be a huge advantage during the election campaign when you have Donald Trump levying tariffs on April 2nd, and Mark Carney being able to be, the Liberal leader on the campaign, but also the Prime Minister making decisions.
Yeah, for sure. And I called you Andrew, I really did. But you're Aaron.
Look, I think the optics are obvious. I mean, look, that's not new. Every prime minister at one time or another goes abroad and gets a chance to look prime ministerial. I might suggest that he could, look inside himself and summon some patience a bit more patience when dealing with reporters. But other than that, I thought it went off fine and there weren't any major hiccups. I think, though, that, sort of beyond the optics, Althia is right that there weren't major deliverables in this trip, but you did, when he was at least back in Canada, have things like, the story in the New York Times about the Canada-EU military supply deal, the deal with Australia to invest in radar technology. I think those are concrete things, but I think it also really goes to sort of where policy and the conversation is going next. We've had the conversation, obviously, about how to respond to tariffs, but the bigger conversation is sort of where Canada fits in the world, how Canada should engage with the world. And that, I think that is really kind of the substance, and what really matters coming out of this trip is that you start to see sort of where, not only he seems to think we need to be going, but potentially where Canada will end up going.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I was on the trip, so that kind of struck me as well, is the intent to realign the country with other allies who have obviously major security and defense assets, and who could potentially help Canada if needed. I don't know whether you thought there was, regardless of the clear deliverables, it was the start of that conversation, it seemed to me, Chantal.
Yes, for sure. And it also sent the message to the Trump administration that there are other things that Canada can be doing in the world, and other people that it can deal with. I'll just go back to the bump in the road and the scrum. Why it should worry handlers of Mr. Carney is that after 2 days of very intense traveling, meetings, which were a lot more like a normal election campaign pace, to tell you the truth, than the leadership campaign ever was, he started to get testy and impatient and frustrated in scrums. And I'm thinking good luck on day 20, because that is what the future holds for Mark Carney. It's 30-some days of nonstop proximity to media who will be asking him questions that are unwelcome. Yeah. And when he will get the opportunity to kind of ruin his day's message by being testy and impatient. So I'm curious to see how he stands up to that scrutiny, because there is nothing like an election campaign. But those 2-3 days, they were more like an election campaign than anything he's seen during the leadership campaign.
For sure. Last quick word to you, Althia.
I'm sure his handlers are not happy that happened, but they should be thankful that it happened before the writ than during the writ, because now they have time to sit him down and tell him what a disastrous move that was and why he cannot do that. And they are trying desperately to have that contrast with Pierre Poilievre. And Mr. Poilievre stands and picks fights with reporters all the time and has a condescending, arrogant tone with a journalist whose questions he doesn't agree with. And Mr. Carney seems to have the exact same problem. It manifests in a slightly different way, but whether it's sorry, Rosie, telling you that your question is coming from a place of ill will, or today in Edmonton when he suggested that the answer to the question was the answer that he wanted to give and not the answer the reporter wanted to give. This is not a good look for him. And if he wants to be the Mr. Sunshine and optimism and compare against the dark gloom that Pierre Poilievre has, he cannot respond to journalists' questions that way, because they're all being live streamed to everybody on the internet and they see everything. They see everything the leader is responding.
At issue, a federal election campaign is about to kick off after the PM visits the Governor General to dissolve Parliament this Sunday, and the parties are already on the trail.
Who's going to put working people first? It's not going to be Pierre Poilievre. It's certainly not going to be Mark Carney. It's going to be us.
In this time of crisis is that the government needs a strong and clear mandate.
Mark Carney will back down, and his liberal policies will keep Canada weak, just like Trump wants.
So how are the parties positioned ahead of an election call? What should we be watching for? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Althia, and Aaron. Aaron, I'll start you off because you didn't get 2 goes on the last one. What is exciting about this election is that it is a race now. It is not a foregone conclusion who is going to win, and that means that the campaign here will matter. What are you watching for as it kicks off?
I mean, we'll see initially how everyone tries to frame the ballot question. To a certain degree, there's a bit of commonality, I think, at this point, that everyone understands that Donald Trump and the state of the country in terms of how well we can withstand Trump are kind of the main issues. But, if you look at some of the polling and, not just the top line party numbers, but some of the individual polling on when Canadians are asked, to compare the party leaders and in the context of Trump, there's a pretty clear advantage at this point for Mark Carney, and that seems to be reflected in the top line party numbers. So, how does Pierre Poilievre sort of respond to that? I think, is the first big question, and whether he can, reframe this question in a way that benefits him. The Liberal rise has been so sudden and fast that it's, I think, fair to wonder whether it could, fall back even just a bit. But at this point, it feels like a completely different campaign than we were having 2 or 3 months ago. And I think that the big question right now is whether Pierre Poilievre can some way recenter the campaign in a way that's more beneficial to him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not clear to me how soft that support is for the Liberals and Mark Carney, but it's very clear that the NDP and the Bloc are in big, big trouble. That seems to be a clear point. Chantal, your thoughts?
I think the NDP is the hardest task. Now that voters have seen someone who is leading the Liberals that could possibly beat Pierre Poilievre, that, and plus the Trump factor, that is driving their voters to the Liberals, and I'm not so sure that there's a strategy to stop it, but I know one thing, to use the strategy of I'm going to be the Prime Minister and I'm Jagmeet Singh, it's not going to work. Yeah. Even diehard New Democrats don't believe that. The Bloc also has, the Bloc lives with the memory of the Orange Wave in 2011 and how it started strong in a campaign and disappeared. So if François Blanchet's job is more complicated than it used to be. The fear of a wave, if you look at today's numbers, they are really bad for the Bloc and really good for the Liberals. But a campaign in Quebec always makes a difference. So the argument that you want someone to check the next government so that it keeps Quebec interest in mind is easier to sell than Jagmeet Singh's I'm going to be Prime Minister line. Right. I do think Pierre Poilievre has a problem in the sense that his CV does not make him the obvious person to deal with Trump. The Liberals traditionally have been the party that stands up to the U.S. Think of the Iraq War, think of Lester B. Pearson and Vietnam. So they do have claiming rights for that. And I believe that Mr. Poilievre stands to suffer from not having built a team. But maybe he's got one in his back pocket that we will see next week, and I will be watching for that.
Althea's shaking her head. That's not the case, Althia.
It's not from what I hear, no, unfortunately for them. I guess a few things. Pierre Poilievre's problem is twofold on the Trump factor. People don't think that he is going to be the toughest negotiator, this is what the polls suggest, toughest negotiator vis-a-vis Donald Trump. So he needs to be even more anti-Trump in some way than the Liberals, to be seen as tougher, to try to show Canadians, potential voters for the Conservatives, that he can bring that fight. At the same time, if he does become Prime Minister, that's a terrible position in the long run to be viewed as insulting, antagonistic to the American president. So it's it can backfire easily. The other thing is he risks alienating his own voters, his own voter base, who actually admire some of the things that Donald Trump is saying. So it's a very difficult position for him.
For sure.
The Conservative has also, frankly, they've been a victim of their own success. They basically killed Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
They killed the carbon tax, the one issue they wanted to run on, by being so successful in prosecuting it. And frankly, they kind of killed Jagmeet Singh too, by dragging out the coalition and tying him to Justin Trudeau and all these years of what they called corrupt government, reminding people or telling people, because I don't think this was true at all, that Jagmeet Singh was only in it for his pension. They destroyed the man. And they are as much responsible for the NDP being in the disastrous position that they are in than, in my opinion, many of the policy stances and strategic moves that the NDP has made. Yeah. How the NDP digs themselves out of it, frankly, I do not know, when the race seems to be a binary choice. But I also agree that that vote is incredibly fluid. Just like the Conservatives misinterpreted the support for Pierre Poilievre, thinking it was a support for the agenda Pierre Poilievre was vocalizing when it was really just an anti-Trudeau vote. Yeah. People believe in what they think Mr. Carney is selling or who he is. Yeah. And that vote, I think, can move. And the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre here, I don't think believes that he will get another shot. And so this is going to be a skirt campaign. Yeah. They will throw everything at it. They will try to destroy Mark Carney. And I think that vote can move. Yeah,
I agree. I think also when you've had a 20, 25 point lead and you don't have it anymore, you're going to do whatever you can to still try and win. And so that might make it pretty ugly. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think we still don't know how Mark Carney will hold up in an election campaign, and that would seem to be the one route available or obvious at this point for the Conservatives to get back into this would be for Mark Carney to falter, to take some positions that don't pan out very well, to have a kind of Turner in 1984 campaign. I think the challenge for Mr. Poilievre in seeing that possibly happen is that Mark Carney has sort of shrunk some of the policy differences, right? Even beyond the Trump question, the domestic policy options have sort of the carbon tax is off the table, the capital gains changes are off the table. Mark Carney's talking about spending less and cutting back on the government, but the Liberals have also still kept things like climate policy and social programs on the table that maybe Pierre Poilievre doesn't really want to fight on those grounds necessarily. So it's hard to know. So it's hard to know how Pierre Poilievre kind of tries to win this campaign in terms of what he tries to do to try to win it back. But it's also hard to know how well Mark Carney does over a 5-week sort of free-for-all.
Last minute to you, Chantal.
It's also hard to know how Pierre Poilievre prosecutes Mark Carney except by ads, and there is a limit to that with no media on his tour.
Yeah. Yes. So yes, you're right. And do you want to say more about that? The fact that he's not, so we're not allowed to travel with the Conservatives. Yeah.
I totally understand that the Pierre Poilievre would not want the media on his tour. The relationship he's had with journalists is so toxic that to imagine that they would all spend 30 days together on the same plane every day boggles the mind. But yes, you can talk to local journalists, but you need to if you're going to prosecute Mark Carney, you're not going to be able to do it locally. You need to do it nationally. And that's going to be an issue at some point.
Yeah, he is. The campaign is giving reporters 2 to 3 days notice to get to locations, but for that is going to limit who can get there for sure. And we'll see how that plays out for them, I guess. At issue, Donald Trump weighs in on Canadian leaders and took aim at the Conservative leader.
The Conservative that's running is stupidly no friend of mine. I don't know him, but he said negative things. I think it's easier to deal, actually, with a Liberal, and maybe they're going to win.
Leaving Pierre Poilievre to respond.
On that point, it's true. I'm a strong leader. I'm a tough guy to deal with. I'm firm in my convictions, and I'll always put Canada first.
So what's been made of the president's comments on the Canadian election? How could they affect support for Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney? Let's bring everyone back. Chantal, Althia, and Aaron. Althia, what do you think? How do you read these comments by the president and the way the Conservative leader responded?
I think actually both camps think they won on that issue.
Yeah.
I think the Conservatives think they got this gift of gold from Donald Trump because it was exactly the kind of attack that they were hoping to get to prove that Pierre Poilievre can be a tough negotiator and people are afraid of him. So they've been posting it everywhere on social media, and I'm sure it will probably find itself in a paid ad at some point. The flip side is the Liberals don't necessarily think it hurt them because Donald Trump says that he'd rather deal with a Liberal, and it kind of makes it seem like maybe the Liberals are the adults in the room. So in a way, he kind of gave a win to both sides. But I do think because it dominated kind of social media news cycle for 24 hours, it shows the impact that Donald Trump is likely to have in the next 6-7 weeks of this election campaign because he can say anything and forget what policy announcements, whether they want to talk about, pre-approving energy corridors or they want to talk about housing. Donald Trump's going to say something and we're all going to run, we being the media, we're all going to run and the public's going to run to see what Donald Trump said and how the camps have responded to it.
Yeah, and that's sort of the unknown factor of this election campaign is how he might blow it up at various points. Chantal, what did you make of his comments?
Well, we will be talking about Donald Trump, if only because of that so-called tariff day on April 2nd, which is about what he does rather than what he says. A lot of Canadians want a prime minister who will stand up to Donald Trump, but also one who will make things better. I'm not sure that hope can be fulfilled, But so I'm with Althia on this. I think both sides got what they liked out of it. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump's non-endorsement or endorsement is not going to determine the outcome of this campaign. And the Conservatives' main fault on this is they always overplay their hand. So no, Donald Trump did not endorse Mark Carney, and it would be best to just leave the comments where they are rather than try to spin them out of proportion.
Yeah, just take the win and walk away. Aaron, last word to you.
Yeah, to be honest, I feel like we get into kind of a weird space, not us, but just in general, the country, if we start worrying about what foreign leaders say about our politics. And I think when it comes to the American president, you also end up having to try to guess at, his sincerity or motivations or what game he may be playing at. Yeah. The fact that the Conservatives sort of rally around these conversations, the comments that Donald Trump makes, the previous comment he made about Pierre Poilievre not being MAGA, to me, it speaks to a certain amount of defensiveness, the willingness the eagerness to kind of show that there's a differentiation between the two of them, that even though Pierre Poilievre's a populist and Donald Trump is a populist, they're not the same or they're not alike. I also find there's just a tinge of irony to the fact that we spent 2 years worrying about foreign interference, and now we have politicians embracing American presidents, what American presidents say about our politics.
Yeah. Oh, the Liberals embraced Barack Obama endorsing Justin Trudeau, so they're...
Bill Clinton came and told the Canadians how we liked a united Canada.
Yeah. So it's interference, influence. We'll take a little bit, but not too much, as long as it's totally clear. Anyway, thank you all. We're going to be busy for the next number of weeks. I appreciate you now and in many of the days ahead. We are also getting ready for an election, and we want to hear from you. If you're an undecided voter, first-time voter, you're not voting, you think you're not going to vote, send us an email at ask@cbc.ca. We want to hear from you. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thank you so much for watching.